It's good to be with you, and I appreciate the opportunity. I know that you've been in these classes looking at different prayers in the Bible. And what I want to talk about tonight is prayers where people did not get what they asked for, or they didn't get what they asked for when they wanted to get it. And that's important for us to understand because prayer to God is not like pushing buttons on a vending machine. You go up to a vending machine, you put in your money, you push the button, and you think you placed your order. You're supposed to get it. That's not the way prayer works. In Philippians chapter 4, it talks about lifting up your supplications and requests before God. So Jesus did say back in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapter 7, he said, ask and it will be given to you. Seek and you will find. Knock and it will be opened unto you. For everyone who asks receives. And the one who seeks finds, and to the one who knocks it will be opened. And so somebody might read that and think, well, it is like a vending machine. You just tell God what you want and you get it. But look at the illustration Jesus attaches to that. He said, which one of you, if his son asks him for bread, would give him a stone? Or if he asks for a fish, will give him a serpent? If you then, who are evil, know how to give good gifts to your children, how much more will your Father who is in heaven give good things to those who ask him? Now, all of those of you that are parents, if you had wisdom as a parent, you did not give your children everything they asked for. You give a child everything they ask for, you will have a very spoiled child, an unhappy child, and a child that is not going to relate well with other people. There are good things that children need. If he needs some bread, you're going to give him bread. You're not going to give him a stone, but you're not going to give him everything he asked for. So we're going to begin with 2 Corinthians chapter 12. So 2 Corinthians chapter 12, Paul discusses his thorn in the flesh. And he says here in verse 7, so to keep me from being conceited because of the surpassing greatness of the revelations, a thorn was given to me in the flesh. I'm not going to take time to discuss what that might have been. The point is, it was something he wanted to be rid of and delivered from. A thorn was given me in the flesh, a messenger of Satan to harass me, to keep me from becoming conceited. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord about this, that it should leave me. But he said to me, my grace is sufficient for you. My power is made perfect in weakness. So how does Paul respond? He says, therefore, I will boast all the more gladly of my weakness, that the power of Christ may rest upon me. Paul had a lot of things difficult in his life. I'm not going to identify any of these as the thorn, but just to mention some of the things that were going on. You remember the time that Paul was stoned, and imagine all the scars that would have left. All the times he was beaten with rods, beaten with whips, all the times he spent in prison, the fact that he knew he might be killed, and he had various people at various times trying to kill him. He had perhaps something wrong with his eyes. He talked about an ailment in his flesh in Galatians chapter 4, and says, you would have plucked out your eyes for me. So maybe it had to do with his eyes, or maybe that was just an expression like you'd cut off your right hand. I don't know. But the thing is, Paul had a number of unpleasant things in his life. And this one that he describes as a thorn, he pleaded with the Lord. Not just once, twice, 3 times. The Lord said, you've got my grace and that's enough. Paul stood there and held the coats and consented to Stephen being stoned to death. Paul used to break into houses and bind and tie up men and women and drag them to prison. Imagine the children that might have been watching and pleading as they see mom or dad dragged away. Paul would beat men and try to get them to blaspheme. He refers to that over in the book of Acts. Paul voted for Christians to be put to death. And Jesus died for Paul. And I said, what are you waiting for? Arise and be baptized, and calling on the name of the Lord and wash away your sins. And he had God's grace. And the Lord says, my grace is enough. We don't need to get the idea that we're going to get everything that we ask for. Sometimes we ask for things and we get them not when we thought we would, but we still get them. My favorite example of this is Luke chapter 1. Take a look at Luke chapter 1. And while I'm turning there, I want to mention this also. Yes, Jesus said, ask and you will receive, but Jesus's brother, who quotes the Sermon on the Mount or refers to the Sermon on the Mount or bounces off of the Sermon on the Mount over and over and over and over in the book of James, says, you ask and you receive not because you ask amiss that you may spend it on your pleasures. And John says, over in 1 John, he says, if we ask anything according to his will, he hears us. So we need to keep that in mind. And Paul's thorn in the flesh, he realizes later it has some purpose. It keeps him humble. And you know what? Sometimes we need that. Sometimes we need things to bring us down that we don't get like Nebuchadnezzar and get puffed up. And sometimes if we're feeling proud, it can be a helpful thing to pray to the Lord to humble you, and he can do it. But we don't need to get everything we want. But this is really interesting, I think. Luke chapter 1, it says here, I'm going to start in verse 5. In the days of Herod, king of Judea, there was a priest named Zechariah of the division of Abijah, and he had a wife from the daughters of Aaron. Her name was Elizabeth. They were both righteous before God, walking blamelessly in all the commandments and statutes of the Lord. But they had no child because Elizabeth was barren, and both were advanced in years. So an older couple never had a child. Now, while he was serving as priest before God, when his division was on duty, according to the custom of the priesthood, he was chosen by lot to enter into the temple and burn incense. We're in Luke chapter 1, verse 10. The whole multitude of people were praying outside at the hour of incense, and there appeared to him an angel of the Lord standing on the right side of the altar of incense. Zechariah was troubled when he saw him, and fear fell upon him. But the angel said to him, do not be afraid, Zechariah, for your prayer has been heard. And your wife Elizabeth will bear you a son. When do you suppose those prayers were placed? I don't know how old they were when they got married, but let's say they were somewhere around 20, and maybe she was a late teenager or even a mid-teenager back at those times. And they got married. And then after a little bit, they're ready for a child, and no child comes. And picture young Zechariah and young, his wife also being young, Elizabeth, and they're praying. And you just picture them praying, oh, Lord, please, let us have a child. Let us have a child. And month goes by, and month goes by, and month goes by, and month goes by, and there's no child. And just picture them praying, continuing to pray. Lord, please. You remember Hannah, who said, please let me have a child, and I'll give him to you. Just, please, can we have a child? And month goes by, and month goes by, and a year goes by, and a year goes by. And imagine those prayers continuing, and years go by, and years go by, and years go by. And now they're older. I don't think they're praying for that anymore. I think that was a prayer they, at a certain point, they just realized we're not going to have a child. And they move forward with their life. And then old Zechariah goes into the temple, and the angel says, got your order, and your prayer has been answered. This was not when he was expecting a child, but he gets a child. And not just a child, but the forerunner of the Messiah, John the Baptist. So sometimes you may be praying for something and you may be disappointed that you didn't get it. It doesn't mean that you won't get it on God's timetable, which may be very, very, very different from yours. And it doesn't mean that you will get it at all. I prayed a prayer on November 16th, 2013. I was discussing with my wife that someday we will have some difficult things in life, and little things that are now, difficult will be like nothing compared to some of the sorrows that we may face later in life. And after I had that discussion, I prayed with her, and I prayed for the safety of all my children. I had 6 children: April, Adam, and Brianne, and Tabitha, and Zach, and 3 boys, 3 girls. And I've always loved having 3 boys and 3 girls. And I love my children very much. And I asked the Lord to watch over them and protect them. The next morning was Sunday morning, and I went to church. And my son, who was in Kentucky, went to church. And that night, I got a phone call from somebody at the church in Kentucky. And they said that Adam was not at church that night. And they said somebody had drowned in the river that day. And it was my son. And I prayed because they hadn't found a body yet. And I prayed that maybe he would be okay on a bank down the river somewhere, tangled up in some debris or something. But as the days went by and they searched and searched, I realized that wasn't going to happen. And I was glad when they lowered the water and let the water out of the dam, and they were finally able to recover my son's body. And I didn't get what I prayed for. Some things helped me through that. One was what I found out my son said that morning. Now, it wasn't a suicide. He was doing his regular exercise that he did in the river that was near his apartment. And he just underestimated how much tow in the water was there because of the heavy, heavy rains and the flooding. And it was near some whitewater rapids. And he got stuck in a current and he just could not get out. There were homeless men under the bridge that saw him, and they couldn't help him. When I got down there and looked for him, there was another fellow that had been homeless, and he still looked homeless. And I was on the bridge watching. He came up and said, "Your son was my friend." He said he would bring, maybe food to him or buy coffee for him. I found out about how Adam would help the homeless guys under the bridge. I found out a lot of wonderful things that Adam would do. They said that at the ball games, he'd go to the ball game, they'd all be watching the football game, and at halftime, they said Adam would be reading his Bible. I got letters from the guys where he worked out in the oil industry out in Texas, and they talked about how Adam would start laughing, and he'd had everybody laughing, but then he'd be on break, and he'd be reading his Bible. He used to volunteer to make wheelchairs to be all-terrain so that people that were handicapped could go to more places. He was just a great, great guy. And I heard about when he got to church there, he volunteered, to take food to people that were sick. This is a college guy, and he's making food, for other people that are sick. I'm really, really proud of my son. But the morning that he died, somebody asked in the college class, they said, when your professor challenges you and says, how could a good God let bad things happen to good people? What are you going to say? And it was my son Adam that spoke up. He said, I like to tell my friends that this world is like a decaying, broken down house, and my God takes care of his people and gets them out of it. And that helped me. I know he was struggling in that river. I know how, because the witnesses said that he was, asking for help and trying to swim out of that current that he got stuck into. And I don't like to think about what his last minutes were like there. But I'm thankful for the son that he is. And I love him, I respect him. And I wish I could have got what I prayed for. Adam would have been a great dad. And I would have loved to have been able to see that. And he would have kept doing wonderful things. But the other thing that helped me out was this. Look at Acts chapter 12. Acts chapter 12. Herod has killed James, the brother of John, with a sword. When he saw it please the people, he seized Peter also. Peter's in prison, and the brethren are praying for him, and he's delivered. You see that? People are praying for Peter, and Peter is delivered. But James wasn't. Who were the three disciples closest to Jesus? Peter, James, and John. Mount of Transfiguration, he only took Peter, James, and John. To the healing of Jairus' daughter, he only took Peter, James, and John. At Gethsemane, he had the others stop, and he went further with Peter, James, and John. The Lord let James die. Do you suppose nobody was praying for James? When James got arrested, do you imagine some brethren were praying for him? We will not get everything that we ask for. But why can't we? Why can't we be like Peter and get everything we ask for? Wait a minute. Peter didn't get killed in this chapter. But from John 21, we know what was going to happen later. What did Jesus say was going to happen to Peter? Peter's going to get killed too. When Peter did get killed, do you suppose there were anybody, brethren, praying for him? I bet there were. It's not God's job to give us every single thing we ask for. If so, there's a lot, all the old and sick people from the past that anybody cared about would still be around. Let's be thankful that we have a God to whom we can lift up our supplications and requests, Philippians 4. But they're not orders. They're supplications and requests. Paul had a supplication request. The Lord said, you've got my grace, and that's enough. Let's be thankful that sometimes we get more. And I'm thankful for the son that I got to have a quarter of a century with, and for all the good he did. I would have liked more, but we're not going to get everything that we ask for. And we don't need to. Thank you.